Humboldt, Hegel, Schiller, Schopenhauer, Domesday, Krauss. Thus, the ideas or texts containing them were arranged in chronological order, without regard to the interactive force through the time period and in their life situations in their times or in seminaries in India. So this was the chronology. Early texts, roots in so-called revealed texts, the Vedas, Brahmanas, Upanishads. Classical texts, Arthashastra, Manual of Economic Political Governance, school systematization, distinctive philosophies in Sutra text, Mimamsa, Nyaya, Vaiseshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Vedanta, and so on. Then medieval development of doctrinal, cultural in the theological and popular traditions, but also in tandem witnessing refinement of arguments, formal logical structures, explicative of a robust debate discourse. For example, the Purva Pakshin and the Siddhanta positions, but also legal jurisprudence and ethical commentary material. Then the fourth is the modern day, barely recognizable by the standards of Enlightenment philosophy or later logical positivism, or the empiricist drive in mathematical logic critiques. The only correlates and parallels were terribly found in idealism, that is, German idealism in its neo-Hegelian iterations in Bradley, McTaggart, and Green. So, modern philosophy, even postmodernists don't actually take Indian philosophy seriously, except that they take some elements from post-colonialism, which comes from more political science. Third part, systems approach. What the Indologists also did was to classify the systems in two above under 6 systems of Indian philosophy, which was derived from a 12th century compendium on basically Hindu 6 schools, Sarvadarshan Sangraha, Madhavas. When the Indologists realized that they had left out whole chunks of Buddhist, Jain, and Kashmir aesthetic schools, they extended to 8 or 10. But this 6th system became the template for all introductions and to extensive reworking of Indian philosophy. Some 30 books bearing this title were published across Europe, the UK, and India, later in North America also. This has been something of a disaster, along with the urge to periodize or chronicalize Indian philosophy. Scant attention was paid to interpretations and reconstruction in real-time engagement with Western philosophy, which nevertheless stood in judgment that were also mixed up with race theories, Darwinian evolutionary biology, and the march of reason or Geist, a la Hegel. Nevertheless, Indian philosophy was acknowledged to be a host of doctrinal, conceptual, argumentative, and experiential strategies, but these were deemed not to map neatly onto Western categories and practices in philosophy, science, or even mathematics, despite the fact that India gave the world the null numeral 0, shunya, without which even computing language and mathematical computations that we have today would not have been possible. So in Hegel, Indian philosophy was somewhere 1,000 years back in the ancient philosophical tradition, dating back to the pre-Socratic philosophers. So the 6 system scenario, along with the intention to periodize, had to be tackled. How do we write an alternative history of philosophy that is not simply history, but is philosophy proper? And an early attempt, which was Ninian Smart's Doctrine and Argument in Indian Philosophy and Karl Potter's Presuppositions of Indian Philosophy. But there is the opposite worry as well, that Indian philosophy is treated by Western trained philosophers, who could also be of Indian origin, as a sort of standing reserve to be mined for interesting or even original statements, but with utter disregard for the historical context and significance. So it cuts both ways. People look at history, but not philosophy. People look at philosophy, but not history. So we only need to look at such manuals of reason as Tarka Bhasha or Anam Bhatta's Tarka Sangraha or Gangesh's Tattva Chintamani to realize that these worries are misplaced. What is distinctive about these indigenous interventions is precisely their systematic effort to identify and analyze the basic tenets of each school, and with the aid of various epistemological, methodological, historical, and logical techniques. To be sure, classical philosophical traditions of such longevity and complexity knows that it demands a number of skills, One needs not only linguistic, philological, and historical, but also philosophical competence and ability to interpret ancient wisdom in contemporary context. So 5, the problems approach. So with these challenges upon us, Jan Mohanty and I sat down to prepare what would become the book for teaching Indian philosophy. Bimal Matilal, then at Oxford University, advised us not to follow any of the models that informed previous works, including that of Ninian Smart, but rather to base it around problems and the big questions, as in the works of G. Moore, Wittgenstein, Quine, David Lewis, Jack Smart, and so forth. This was a tall order. You could have individual studies that treat of problems X or Y, but not a whole tome, whole volume that treats of the plethora of problems and their possible responses in what is a rather diverse tapestry of Indian philosophical schools and traditions. It took some 4 to 5 years of thinking through various recipes, as it were, and a close look at all the major and some undiscovered studies in Indian philosophy by contemporary authors. So the Routledge history of Indian philosophy departs from this approach on the 2 above by arguing that chronologies are relative to given philosophical culture. If classical is an apt term for much of the early period of Indian philosophy, medieval is not. There is no break with the past in India, similar to the onset of European Middle Ages and so forth. Foundational sutras for Sankhya, Yoga, Buddhist, Jain, Charvak, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, and Vedanta traditions are continuously composed over several centuries, beginning around 500 BCE, and the commentarial tradition continues well into the middle of the second millennium of the Common Era, and they still continue to this day. We don't get to see them, but they are there. New attempts at the periodization of Indian philosophy reflects its own evolution rather than how the evolution maps onto periods and movements in Western philosophy. So those who are familiar with the Routledge history of Indian philosophy will see that the range is extensive. And while there is a focus on early stages of Indian philosophy, the intermixing of religions and philosophy, there are also sections that are concerned exclusively with philosophical problems in epistemology, pramanas, ontology, like Sankhya, Vaisheshika, Buddhist schools, Vaishika, and so forth. Linguistics, I was thinking of Abhidharma, linguistics, aesthetics, and the esoterics such as Tantra. But there are also chapters on Sikh philosophy, Indian Muslim philosophy, and post-colonial concerns. So RHIP, as we call it for short, is already being used in teaching curriculum in India and in English-speaking Western Academy. The American Philosophical Association has recognized it as a seminal text for introducing Indian philosophy for a more inclusive pedagogy towards world philosophies. Finally, brief comment on Indian Ethics Project, which follows on from Indian philosophy. We did something similar again, inspired by Bimal Matilal and Professor Mohanty on the book on Indian ethics in 2 volumes. Again, it was felt that philosophy, at least in the West, has not registered either the intrinsic importance or the influence of Indian ethics. From a philosophical standpoint, this curious omission has had baleful effects insofar as it has severely narrowed the scope and range of ethical discourses and the critical elements that ethics relies on for internal debates and discussions, which is very robust in Western tradition, but it doesn't actually include non-Western traditions. So, except in very individual interactions and arguments in papers that I've been involved with Western philosophers. So when we conceived of this project, we had 3 purposes in mind. One, first, to provide a faithful account of the great texts in major schools of both Orthodox and so-called heterodox traditions. Second, to relate such an account to present-day concerns and context. Third, to highlight what we felt might be distinctive about Indian ethical traditions in both content and style, text and context. So it covers a wide range of topics in Indian ethics, using key historical sources to set up the issues, incorporates a wealth of research on ethical theories. Insightful comparisons with Western discussions and cross-cultural responses are used to think through these issues with multiple perspectives of the Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions. rational ethics, deontic, and communicative ethics, looking at parallels in two-way explorations. We also looked at postmodern Levinesian ethics in the context of Buddhist, Jain, and Gandhian ethics for the well-being of the other, on the virtues of non-injury and compassion. So overall, this was a rather scholastic exercise. People ask, what of applied context? How does Indian philosophy play out in real-life challenges, especially in contemporary times in India and Indian diaspora, or applicable to moral challenges in our secular world, such as climate change and so on? So we conceived volume 2 to address these concerns in the real sense of practical ethics. The intent of this volume is to open up possibilities for future philosophical research, especially the one in dialogue with present-day Western moral thought and the applied philosophies that are practiced there. It brings together essays by leading thinkers in the various subject matter covered under applied or practical ethics. The thematic collection includes reflections on social justice, gender, bioethics, ecology of distinguished scholars in the field. Notably, the volume editors increased the visibility of the voices of some renowned female intellectuals in this area as well. So the thematic sections are divided into 6 logically organized parts: women, gender, and negotiating feminism, contemporary thinking and politics, engage ethics, ecofeminism and environmental ethics, environment and spirituality, health ethics, and public welfare. So finally, just 3 examples of what some of the chapters do. Mandakaranta Bose, in her chapter on women and ethics in Hindu thought and practice, indicates with textual evidence the rift between the ethical idea and the social practice of the Indian tradition as regards women, and the contradictions that could be discerned in the Hindu ethical construction of womanhood and laws pertaining to women. However, the ideas may be a bit more systematically grouped together and presented in other chapters which also take place. In the chapter on biotechnology and ethics in India, Jyoti Bhosle and myself highlight the extent to which the multinational corporations and the state are complicit in eroding intellectual and organic variety of property rights. And the article gains added significance as the debate on implications of biotechnologies on human beings is yet to gain momentum in India, although considerable efforts have been made to explore the implications for agriculture, especially as regards genetically modified seeds and cotton and so on. The whole GMO movement, heralded by Monsanto and other companies. A new section is added on environmental ethics. It is a comparative feature as it refers to both Buddhist ecology, Western ecofeminism, sustainability, and inquiries about Buddhist ecofeminism. So other chapters cover Gandhi, again, sustainability, ecology, bioethics, Indian gender issues, animal justice, and even water, how water was conceived, harvested, and preserved as an answer to the water crisis, droughts, water wars happening today in the world, and their responses to climate change. These are then the innovative forays being made in the field of Indian philosophy in the projects that I've been shepherding from my bases in Australia, India, and US, now Europe, and promisingly Russia, thanks to all of you gathered distinguished scholars and my colleagues now at this conference, which shows a real commitment in which I too am most grateful to be invited and engage. Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha. Om Shanti. So this is my speech.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing with us with your intellectual results of your intellectual activity. And I hope that these 2 brilliant works, The History of Indian Philosophy and Indian Ethics, the Russian readers will be able to read in Russian, probably in 2 or 3 years. Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you very much.